Good morning, everyone. So what you see here is naturally occurring asbestos. Some of you may know it in its industrialized form because of its properties being very insulating and resisting to heat. But I bet that the majority of you know asbestos today because of this picture. Asbestos, due to its very fine structure, once it's processed, creates a dust that's deposited in our lungs and causes a type of cancer that is called mesothelioma. Now, at this point, I've either piqued your interest or lost your attention completely. So what does asbestos have to do with our topic of risk society, precaution, and progress? Well, in the early 1900s, asbestos was hailed as a miracle material. It was needed in the very fast-growing cities of the UK and the US because of its fire and heat-resisting properties. Just within a few decades, dozens of companies sprang up, and the consumption of asbestos grew tenfold by the 1980s. However, already by the 1930s, there were some indications that it was dangerous to our health, but neither governments nor businesses acted upon it. So by today, millions of people have died because of asbestos exposure. Only by the 1980s did the governments enact regulation that heavily restricted the use of asbestos. And as you can see in the graph, there was then a sharp drop in consumption. So the lessons learned from asbestos and other technological advancements like that is that progress comes with a risk. But we are simply not capable of assessing that risk today anymore. Technology has advanced beyond our grasp. And even if we would understand the consequences, we are simply too skeptical and think that business will not act on behalf of society, but instead act just to maximize shareholder profits. So this is where government is stepping in today and regulate businesses very heavily. In theory, this may even work and we would have a new sustainable way of progress. But what is happening today really is we are living in risk societies. We are so afraid of future impacts of our actions that we choose not to act at all, and thereby essentially stagnating, which by itself may be the much more risky option, and it's definitely costing us as we speak. There was a study done just this year by the George Washington University that showed the cost of regulation in the United States. And the concerning part about that is it's not so much the economical costs, which increased from 3 billion to over 50 billion in the last 50 years, but it's the social cost that we're paying because we forego advancements in technology, science, and health. So as a society, we find ourselves at this crossroads, needing to take risks to progress, but we're unwilling to do so. And business is right in the epicenter of that dilemma. Businesses need to navigate in heavily regulated environments, yet they still need to achieve technological process in order to create shareholder value. Now, we looked at a few cases where companies have been navigating in this environment, and we will walk you through those. In the 1980s, Dow Chemicals was facing exact this kind of public resentment that I'm talking about. The interesting part about that was, though, the further away people lived from the Dow plants, the more the resentment was. So Dow realized that it's not so much the company as the general attitude towards the industry that is creating this resentment. So before government enacted regulation, Dow decided to act himself. Together with the Canadian Chemical Producing Association, they created their own standard. So essentially, they self-regulated by creating responsible care. Responsible care was an industry-wide standard, and after 25 years, most of the big chemical companies and even some non-chemical companies have joined it. It has been very effective at addressing the public concern. And not only that, not only did it improve the image of the chemical industry as such, it was also effective in reducing emissions, reducing costs, and in some cases even increasing revenues for the players in this industry. Now, this may be a very idealized case. Not every company is in a position to self-regulate. And so we looked at a case that is unfolding as we speak, where a company is facing much tougher headwind from regulation.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm here to talk to you about bees. More specifically, why are they dying? Recently, I mean, in the last 10 years, there has been a lot of talk about bees dying in large numbers. You can imagine the gravity of the situation that it figured prominently on the cover of Time magazine. And more importantly, Ralph, our program director, deemed it fit to write a case on. So what exactly is killing the bees? The research into this, they were inconclusive. They pointed to 61 different factors that could potentially cause the bees to die in large numbers. But more recently, I mean, mostly after 2010, a lot of blame has been directed towards some pesticides and how they could affect the bee health. So I know that there are a few chemists in the room, and I would like to pose this question: what exactly is this chemical compound? Sorry? Absolutely. Please, a round of applause. Okay. That's it. So we have the right audience for this. So this chemical compound, or family of chemical compounds called the neonicotinoids, or neonics, has taken a lot of blame for the bees dying in large numbers. And these chemicals are found primarily in the pesticides made by 3 chemical crop sciences companies: Bayer and BASF from Germany, and Syngenta from Switzerland. So as we can expect, and as we saw with the previous case, quickly there was a lot of interest which was aggregated towards trying to get EU to ban these chemicals. And finally, EU succumbed to this pressure and banned it, although there was, I would say, not a clear causal link which would connect the use of these chemicals to the bees. So what would you say, what was the ground on which EU could ban it if there was no strict causal link? Well, in EU, we have something called as the precautionary principle. So stated simply, it means it's better safe than to be sorry. And EU invoked that to ban the use of neonicotinoids. So for these companies, first they had to work in a strict regulatory environment, and if that was not bad enough, they also got a little attention from Greenpeace. That's the Syngenta Tower in Basel that you see. A huge banner was unfurled, basically blaming Syngenta for killing the bees willfully. Now these images and more, I mean, they make me wonder, or rather convinced, that we are living in a risk society. That as society, we're becoming too risk averse. We would not risk anything if we stand to lose even a bit. Well, both Syngenta and Bayer, they woke up to the challenge. I mean, some might argue a bit belatedly. And they tried to say, okay, we need to look at this more holistically. Maybe it's not just the neonicotinoid, maybe it's something else. Maybe there are other factors in play. And this issue needs to be seen in the light of scientific evidence, hard scientific facts, rather than just talking about it at a more emotional level. Well, so that's the PR, that's the regulation, but what about hard economic facts? We are in a business school here, we're here to talk about numbers and not just some tra-la-la, as our director would say. So if you just take a look at some numbers, and these are 2009 numbers, this amounts to 2.6 to 3 billion US dollars in lost revenues for these companies. Now, that is not a small amount. I mean, most of us who have worked in small or medium-sized businesses would realize that it could be the death of the business. I would like you guys to take a moment and think, what would this amount represent for your business? Can you take a hit like this and survive? Some might, others might not. But there is another important question which begs answering. Who bears the cost? Is it just these chemical companies, or is there a cost for the society as well? What happens to the crops if there are not enough pesticides? According to some figures, there could be 20% hit in productivity. Now, again, translating this to dollar amounts, in the next 5 years alone, according to some estimates, and they claim to be conservative, it could be 17 to 20 billion euros for the EU in the lost revenues from these agricultural products. And there is a human side to it. There is a human cost. In countries like Romania, Hungary, which depend a lot on agricultural productivity, it would mean a loss of jobs. 12,000 to 15,000 jobs would be affected because of this ban. So in the end, who pays the price? Is it just these chemical companies, or is there a price that society has to pay? And in whose favor is EU regulating? Is it really protecting the interest of society here? Well, that has to be argued. So I'd like to summarize what we saw today in this presentation. So we basically ask ourselves these questions. We saw with the case of asbestos that maybe we cannot rely solely on businesses to self-regulate. But then with the case of Dow, we had an example where a company not only met the expectations, but exceeded them, and could strike a balance between being environmentally responsible and creating shareholder value. And finally, with the case of the bees and the crop sciences company, we ask, how much regulation is good? How far should governments go in regulating, putting in a strict regulatory framework? These questions and some more we'll try to explore with you in our workshop. And in doing so, hopefully, we would have avoided the fate that befell the likes of Syngenta and Bayer in this case. Thank you.